Hello and good evening. Most welcome to H754. And today I will address a rather difficult subject to handle, and that's the different assumptions that we discover in time in the Western society. One could say our thinking is based on foundations. We like to have something firm to stand on. And the idea from this lecture was gotten from the previous lecture when I saw that discoveries of that Sarah Feldman Bartlett. She has put into layman term the latest discovery in brain science, and what they discovered within brain science goes against non-verbalized assumptions, so that emotions are a thing and they need to be treated as a thing is an non-verbalized assumption within Western culture. And as we have foundation, that very non-verbalized foundation has actually made it possible to have verbalized foundation. And that is the establishment of rationality. This is just one instance of a thing. So that's actually the second thing we discovered. We also discovered before, thanks to quantum mechanics, that the observer is implicit or partaking in reality. Observer-dependent reality is a very, very clear questioning of the assumption, once more, non-verbalized assumption about object in space in front of the subject. That is not something, it needs to be hypothesized and it needs to be motivated. And nobody knew about this assumption until quantum mechanics. And actually, the very hint that it was an assumption came from the East. Don't you think this is a bit problematic? We start to think I exist in this century, well, I started to exist in the last century. That means a lot of my material is going to be ruled by rules I don't even know about. That cuts away a lot of my thinking liberty, freedom. And I think this is a trend. And this was actually pointed out by several philosophers, either indirectly like Martin Heidegger or directly like Ludwig Wittgenstein. But the thing is, there could be more hidden assumption. And I think this actually takes in question the whole idea why we should have a foundational philosophy. Why does it have to be based on something? Why should it be that? Eastern philosophers are never based on anything. There's pure assumptions from the beginning, and they're always verbalized and given a reason for. We don't say this is the firm ground. We don't look for an archaea. They don't look for an archaea, a formal substance that founds all other thinking. It's like a schoolmate of mine said, we need to hypothesize that there is an external world, otherwise we have nothing to talk about. It's an odd way of putting it, but I think he has a point there. Most people think that way. But there is indeed good reasons to question foundations and a foundational idea of knowledge. And one of the reasons is there are different traits that we have in Western society that's not shared by, for instance, East Asia. One that really, something that strikes me directly, it's secularism. The whole idea of getting rid of all religion all the sacred, everything holy, development, the divine, the spiritual, that is gone in the Western world, never to be resuscitated. Some people say, I think it could. The second thing, the second difference, is the dissolution of family. Family hardly exists anymore. People don't even procreate. And the third one is being the dissolution of intellectual life, something pointed out by, for instance, Alan Bloom, but also indirectly by Derrida, and I would say directly by Paul Feyerabend. Wittgenstein was really clear on that point. And the fourth one is actually arguments coming from medicine. We have a lot of what we call in the West mental diseases that turned up just the last centuries. Some of these just the very last century. One that is about 3 centuries old is schizophrenia. And this century we've been endowed with dyslexia, ADHD, DAMP, OCD, dyslexia, I don't know what else, there's a lot of them. We have really high factors when it comes to repetitive strain injuries. We have a lot of problem with fibromyalgia, we have problem with permanent back injury, permanent back trouble, permanent back pain, so forth, so forth. This is unique for the Western society. That needs some sort of explanation. And this never gets explained. And then we have the perpetual problem with stress. And I think stress is one of those things that needs to be explained, because it's just a word you use when you don't want to understand or explain anything. And we've been looking at, for instance, this one. This is actually a cause of stress, because you don't understand reality. This hidden assumption is off. It means that you don't understand what's happening around you. Now with the second one, emotions, we don't know yet. We need to investigate in the days that comes. But I found this example just by looking really hastily. And that is something man often say, that there are some people that lack humor, or it could even be a description of person being maybe a bit slow or something. And that person is supposed to take words literally. Is there any problem with that expression? What do you think, Alan?
What is literally?
Yeah.
Is it the etymological meaning of the words? No, it cannot be. If this person has not studied languages professionally.
It's very problematic, and there you see there's a hidden assumption what on earth is literally. And we don't agree on what that is. And that's also, actually, listen here, it's also an indication, like a little bump, that there could be a literal meaning of words. And where those literal meaning of the words are, I don't know. But we all here in the West agree there are some meanings that are literal, and there are some meanings that are not literal.
But the good side with this literal metaphor, we acknowledge that there is actually at least 2 meanings possible.
Well,
that's the good side.
Yeah, that's the good side. There's at least some bonus to the whole thing. But those non-verbalized assumptions have a tendency to pop up somewhere. And if I would try to speak to some Korean or some person from Taiwan and ask that person, what is the literal meaning of this word? And are the Taiwanese people who take everything literally? I would never be able to make myself understood, because the workings of the language which has multiple meanings. Maybe there could be some people that have even more meanings than the normal amount, but one literal meaning, that doesn't really make any sense. And I think this is one of the problems with these non-verbalized assumptions. They need to be verbalized. They need to be thought out. They need to be formulated. They need to be found out. Those three factors. Before we do that, we run the risk of going completely hayward. It's a little bit like before we discovered that there was a huge landmass on the other side of Europe, America, we made huge mistake when it came to navigation. Once we discovered that, we understood the Earth much better. These, because we don't know about them. That's the big problem. If we know about them, they wouldn't cause any problems. And this is what I like with Eastern philosophy. You have to tell all the assumptions you have, all the hypotheses. The second thing, you need to motivate them. The second thing maybe is not that important, but the first thing, all the assumptions I am going to make today, I will have to tell them. I have to put them on paper, I have to think them, I have to verbalize them. That is a ground formulation. That does not exist in the West. And we discussed it so much in mathematics because the law of the excluded middle is never formalized. We don't say that. When I learned mathematics in school, when I did it all the way into high school, nobody taught me about this law of excluded middle. It was silent. And that's the problem, because if we have assumptions that are just in the body, so to speak, they are embodied, nobody speaks about them, we're not consciously aware about them, they are going to guide you. And you don't have a choice anymore. And this is the reason I think this is very dangerous, because that makes you choiceless. You are going to be led into an alley, and that alley could horribly enough be the Platonic cave. Why else would Plato go into the cave? He didn't like that place. Nobody else liked that place, but he didn't think it was any other option. Non-verbalized assumptions. He was affected by them. And they started not by a philosopher saying them. They started by a change in life word and change in embodiment. And that would also explain why on earth do we have these bodily problems? Why do we have discoordination? Why do we have dysplasia, as lack of proprioception? Why are we the only people who are misusing our bodies? Why doesn't the regular Chinese do that? Why doesn't the regular Hindu do that? It's very uncommon. So I think this needs to be looked into. Maybe it could even be possible to find out other hidden assumptions. Just put them into the light. They do not have to be criticized or anything, but just take them out into the light. Have a look at them. Because I would really like to know what is guiding me. What is sort of putting my thinking in just that direction. Once I was actually tricked myself, I don't want to be that once more. And I think it's a shame that so many people in our society unconsciously being tricked into thinking ways they shouldn't go into. Why on earth should we otherwise give up, for instance, religion after 2000 years? There doesn't seem to be any good reason. It must be something unconscious, because sure, it is not science. And when people say it's science, I don't think they mean it really. Or they don't even know what they were talking about. Well, I have a rather funny example here. I don't know if my colleague here, dear Kalle Lundahl, has seen the movie Star Trek. No, that's a shame. Because there is actually one of the characters called Spock, who is from the planet of Vulcan. And he is completely logical and rational. And therefore, according to the makers of the movies and also the TV series, they say he doesn't have emotions. And this is very, very funny because we just reveal that emotions are not hardwired. They actually the most rational we have. They are hypotheses of the world. Some of these things have actually turned up indirectly. This is going to make it even more interesting. One of these people is Damasio. He suggested halfway, because this is what's happening now. We are going in a certain direction in brain science and neurology. So some of these things has actually been prophetized by different people. And one is Damasio. The other one is Goldman, and he's very interesting because he is the guy who invented the expression emotional intelligence. And he's also halfway to the conclusions that I mentioned earlier from Sarah and Bartet. And he says something to the effect that emotions could be something that we use to understand problems like IQ problems, math problems and such stuff. So that was showing the way into the conclusions we come now to. But I think it would be maybe one of the most cherished beliefs in Western civilization, that emotions are something we don't have any control whatsoever. And I haven't even started to think about these things too much, but I know that if you go to some other place that's very different, I noticed they don't seem to show up the same categories of emotions. There are some emotions I can't decipher. And I always thought that was weird because I thought indirectly without thinking it was hardwired. This is how I felt. And the felt sense, that's more pervasive because that's almost I see it. I could see it's like that. It's not a thinking thing, and I couldn't discuss it with somebody else. You see how problematic it is? Because I don't know about it. But something here has been off the point. And let me just mention a few here. Number A is, and this is how to read faces. We mentioned that before with the Swedish guy Paul Ekman, a Swedish relation. And he was he is to this day, and his daughter as well, very much involved in technology of reading people's faces. You can have cameras in public places like squares, such. And why would you have those cameras? What could they do? What do you think, Kalle?
Survey. What do you mean more specifically?
What could they tell you? They sort of zoom in on a face if somebody's walking on the square.
And if they want, of course, prevent crime.
Yes, good
and
thinking.
So if criminals might have weapons, that is usual. So of course, if they see that somebody has a knife, perhaps partially hidden.
Could be a knife partially hidden. But they also want to find malintent in the face.
Yes, so yes, of course, if you have to be expert almost in
yes.
facial reading.
And they want to further the technology to read faces so you can tell if somebody is wanting to do harm. And that ran into trouble. First, we thought that was possible. For instance, I think you all heard about lie detectors. Lie detectors actually read off if you're lying or not. But we now come to the conclusion, when you leave your own culture, they're not as trustworthy anymore. And that's a bit of a shocking insight. The second thing, B, facial expressions aren't universal. They are as different from each other almost that a smile could be anger. You see? This I experienced many times. I interpreted people to be angry when they were actually happy. And I think usually here in Sweden, if we know a happy person, we really demand that person to be smiling. But they're actually not true for some cultures. They don't smile when they're happy. They could smile. India is a good example. A smile in India doesn't mean I'm happy. It means nice to see you. It's a way of greeting, you could say. You always smile when you see somebody new, or anyone for that reason. Then you smile. So it's like saying hi. And I was shocked by that, because I thought that, my God, that's the smiling people. Because every photo, of course the photographer is standing on a square, and everybody sees the photographer and they want to salute him and they smile to him. And from the photos from India, everybody thinks the Indians are smiling constantly. They are not smiling quite a lot, I would say. And you see how different those things could be. Every person almost have different facial expressions to different people. We don't know about that. We just recently discovered that. So I don't show the same facial expressions to spouse, family, strangers, friends. Certain friends I can show different things, and they could be sometimes opposite even. So all these things are pretty severe, and it's not hard to understand. If you have a conscious idea of all emotions are the same, that's going to trick you. Well, it actually says here, words are not emotions, so we have to be careful not to connect facial expressions to one word, such as happy. And that is actually one thing to think about. It seems that emotions are, how could one say, more fundamental or not as verbal as words. We can use words to put on emotions, but emotions seem to be more before words somehow. And that's problematic, but they still sometimes can be explained. That's what I tried to do before. But it's incredibly important to understand that the baby learns what we call emotions from the surrounding people. And if the surrounding people are different, the child will show different emotions. It's not even necessary that the little baby smiles. And until very recently we thought smile, laughter, other things, tiredness are inborn. They actually learned directly from the parents, the surrounding language. Isn't that interesting? And we have oddly enough, a complete control over our emotions. We cannot change our emotion at this instance, but on a long term, every emotion can be changed. And you can have a completely different set of emotions than you have presently. And then snap, you are in East Asia. Because you can never apologize, say, I have that emotion. I really felt so jealous when I discovered my spouse with somebody else, so I killed her or him or whatever. It doesn't work there. Because you are responsible for what you sort of emotive, and they don't even have the same type of words. It is actually implied in their language, this is something you choose. And it makes sense. We are advanced human beings. We are advanced animals, I should say. It doesn't really make sense that we should be ruled by things we can't control. That flies into the face of being higher somehow. If emotions take control of us, there's nothing left of humanity really. We'll be like animals. The good thing we're not. All the emotions we feel we can change. Our emotional reactions are changeable, moldable, and they've been put there at some time and they can actually be changed. And this is a very funny thing, because this is even a bit more than I was opting for. I want to have liberty. Here you can actually even have control. And I start to understand that maybe this is what Sarah Feldman-Bartlett is pointing to. I haven't read her book yet. I just started with one article. And that is quite interesting, because if we in our culture have this really strong idea that emotions can't be changed, that they're hardwired, that makes me into a victim for my own feelings. Imagine that I, for some reason, think somebody don't like me, or all people don't like me, or half the population don't like me. I will think either that they really don't like me, or secondly, I have a feeling it's not to be trusted, but I still have that feeling and I can't help it. Remember all those people who think that there are constantly bacteria on their hands, OCD. That's why I mentioned that. OCD is very uncommon in East Asia. But OCD is you put an emotion into your head. You establish it, you make it stronger, it takes a couple of months, and then it's so strong it takes you over. But it was you who started it from the beginning. And by realizing you are molding your own emotions, you can get that liberty to first get rid of the OCD problem, and then you can change your other emotions. And to be free, there is actually a very good Chinese science. It means to be in control. Otherwise, there is no freedom. And I think that goes really hand in hand with this problem in Western society of passivity. That we look upon the world like it's controlling us. If we believe that, that will happen. And this belief, emotions that they are hardwired, are really problematic. That makes you to a sitting duck for everything that can happen to you. And if you don't develop these horrible OCDs, it could be something else you develop. Everything can be changed, but you need to do the change at the same time you think it. And that's almost what we have come to intuitively, me and Kalle Lundblad here, put verbal orders at the same time we actually do something, slow movement. And this is the suggestion of neurology. You need to do it. And if you want to treat yourself from one common OCD is washing your hands too often, you need to first take control of your thinking capacity, and you should think your hands are not dirty. But then you also need to refrain from washing your hands. Because thinking is not only in your head, it's in what you do. But if you combine what you do and what you think, you have the concept of freedom. And this is the Chinese sign for control and freedom. So you see here, we've been slaves to these assumptions, and I think we should go out and find more of these assumptions. But I think this could actually be a key feature, because if we don't have the energy, we won't do the other things. Yeah?
I have another non-verbal assumption, which is related to emotion. So I think you will find this very interesting. But I think this non-verbal assumption is actually true, because I think Heidegger believed that. So Heidegger told that, or implied that, you have Surhanden, Vorhanden. If you put something in front of you that is on the distance, you are supposed to be more rational. That's like when you gave that example of a theologian, professional theologian.
Yes.
If you put something in at a distance, you are more rational. While if you put it closer to you, you are more God-believing, and you are not trustworthy. But I think Heidegger actually taught this, because he had this example with the spectacles, eyeglasses. That is, if they work as, if they, the spectacles, eyeglasses, they are like Surhanden. That is very close to you. But when they break, you look at them from Surhanden.
Forehanden.
But so to say that they are, you are looking at them from the distance. That is, you are. Heidegger implies that you should, so to say, okay, you're looking at it from distance because you're supposed to leave your emotions there, looking at it rationally. What is your thought about?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that putting it at a distance, it is to put it in forehand, and what he wants to show is that you are at liberty to do what you want. You don't have to automatically put it in forehand. It would almost be something like this, and I think this is not an original non-verbalized assumption, that to put something into forehand is more correct or real or shared. You often see shared. Let me give you this picture. If we see people at a distance, for some reason they look the same, one aspect. And here you can see how universals start to come up. You can also see differences. When you have things too close to your hand, it's very hard to see differences. It's just smack on reality. You can have a choice. That's what Heidegger means. Sometimes it's better with Surhanden, sometimes with forehand. But make it conscious. Make it verbalized. Make it distinct in your head. And then you will be in control what to do. So I am a true former anonymous forehandist, I could say. I used to put everything in forehand, but I never know I did it. I just assumed that was more correct and more shared. Heidegger goes against the grain when it comes to that. Heidegger taught me that it's not completely true. It doesn't make it more collective or commune if I do everything forehand. It could actually, and in most usual cases, if I individually do a forehand all times where you don't do it, it's going to put me into the odd situation. I'm going to sound really off. So that I was taught by Heidegger. You have a choice what to do. You can choose between forehanden and Surhanden. And that's actually making a distinction clear. And I would also add that Thean Alathea gives you more choice. You can stick to the old model, yes, but you get more choice from Alathea and Thea. So in a body way, it's more true, because more choices mean more reality. It's like less choices is less reality. It's like, I was really into this. This was my thing. And I would say I would never fallen for that if somebody told me this is how it looks. You can put it to the distance, you can put it close. They could be both different. I still have a person, a friend of mine, who is completely into the forehand. And everything is at a distance. And that affected him hugely. He has problem even to understand himself. He needs to talk to himself, to make himself understood. And I would say this lies in the background. This is a great problem. And let's say that. If we can find more assumptions, it would be great. The more the better. And it's not the point of criticizing them. Just put them into the open. And then everybody can judge for themselves. Like this is what we have. And this is maybe a completely new thing apart from that, as grand. I think my colleague's getting tired here, and so am I. There was a very intriguing day, and maybe tomorrow's going to come up some even newer thing. No, not even new, but as new. I say thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and have a very good night.
Thank you.